Mark, it is truly a pleasure to have you here. I'm so excited. You're going to be just such a great guest. I am Dan Steinler. I'm the owner and founder of CCR Search. We specialize in sales and marketing, accounting and finance, and construction for our customers and finding top talent. Speaking of recruiting, I have Mark J. Lindquist with me. The topic we'll be covering today is recruiting for Ukraine. Let me give a quick rundown of who Mark is. Mark J. Lindquist's life and career are two of the most awe-inspiring stories you have truly ever heard. He is a U.S. Air Force and Afghanistan war veteran who currently resides in Fargo, North Dakota. He believes if one human being can do a thing, you can too. He started his life in an orphanage in Seoul, South Korea, was adopted, brought to America at the age of 8 months, and raised on a farm in rural Minnesota. He then went on later on in life to serve in the Air Force honorably at Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu, Hawaii. There he had an incredible opportunity to sing the national anthem for the U.S. military, as well as the World Touring Entertainment Unit called Tops in Blue, which is similar to a USO or Bob Hope show. During his time on the island of Oahu, Mark earned a few roles on ABC's Lost, CBS's Hawaii Five-0, and in the Universal Studios movie Battleship, which I love, by the way, great movie. And since launching his motivational speaking firm, Mark J. Lindquist Motivational Speaking and Entertainment, and his consulting firm, Lindquist and Associates, he has had the opportunity to speak for the largest companies in America, including McDonald's, Walmart, Starbucks, and IBM, as well as sing for the largest crowds in America, the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, and the NCAA, and perform for the President of the United States of America. He's widely known in the professional speaking industry as the fastest growing motivational speaker in America, having been invited to deliver guest lectures to over 1,500 aspiring and professional speakers, including many Hall of Fame speakers. However, the reason I asked Mark to join the CCR Search podcast is because of his recruiting efforts for the war in Ukraine. So since March of 2022, Mark has been on an unpaid, self-directed humanitarian mission to Ukraine to deliver non-lethal aid directly to Ukrainian soldiers fighting for their freedom. He's doing everything from fundraising to directly recruiting volunteers to fly to Krakow, Poland, with boxes of coats, hats, and other non-lethal gear, cross over the border and supply Ukrainian troops with needed gear to support their efforts. And what's even more amazing about the story is these are unpaid individuals that he recruits for who just simply support the mission. While Mark's team is working overseas, he can be found hustling daily to bring awareness to the war in Ukraine and raise supporting funds. He most recently started Operation Sleep Out just a few weeks ago. He was camping outside in Broadway Square in Fargo, North Dakota, at temperatures below 40 degrees and live streaming his experience. So from singing national anthems, motivational speaking, camping in below freezing weather, to many other endeavors to selflessly support the Ukrainian war, Mark is on a mission for change. And today we'll discuss a little bit about how Mark recruits volunteers for this incredible mission. So Mark, real pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, my brother.
So, we'll kind of just jump right in here. If there's anything you want to add before we do, and if not, I'm going to ask you a little bit about, how you're finding these volunteers.
The volunteers that I started to work with over in Ukraine, I guess we got to start from the beginning. I walked over the border in April into Ukraine, into a war zone with a guy I met on Facebook.
The power of social media.
Right. And maybe that's the rest of the world, how that works. You never know who's going to walk into your office or who's going to submit the contact form and who you're going to be evaluating for whether they're going to be a part of your team or not. And so it's fascinating. A lot of the people that ended up being part of our volunteer team over there, it was very serendipitous. It was very random. Because remember, when you walk into a war zone and try to help as a humanitarian volunteer, there's no central volunteer checkpoint. There's no, orientation or database. It's just a bunch of random people who grabbed their passports, walked into a country and started to solve problems and tried to figure out how to help. These people are people that you met at, waiting for an Uber or on the train, or, waiting to get a coffee and fumbling through the language. And then two English speakers who don't speak Ukrainian help each other out because maybe they'd been there 2 days longer than I have, and they'd figured out how to say, I'd like a small coffee with milk. And, and then friendships would blossom out of that, because you're in a foreign country where, yes, if you're under 40 years old, probably you speak some English and certainly understand it. But we don't, us stupid Amerikanskis, right? The Americans that come in that are, that only speak English. So we would gravitate to one another, right? And so I don't know, maybe this is a stretch to make this analogy or connection, but who do you end up bringing on your team? Who do you end up recruiting to the organization that you're working with? It's people that maybe are on the same wavelength, maybe that have a little connection and something to build from when you're building a relationship and a partnership. And so that's all it was. It was the commonality of being from America, being in Ukraine, not having a lot of friendlies, not having a lot of allies out there when we first started in March and April, and then realizing, well, if there's somebody standing in front of me that on their own volition bought a plane ticket, made their way down to the border, and now is standing inside Ukraine during active war, maybe I know or could assume that that person may be of a high quality of individual because they're walking the talk, right? They're standing there in front of you. Now, that would be one's assumption, or you could make that your assumption. But let me tell you, this war has also attracted all kinds of people, all kinds of people that you would not want to have your six, that you would not want to get in a car with, because, it's a war zone in a green zone, right? And that's maybe something people maybe don't understand, is that Ukraine, if it's Ukrainian controlled territory, it's a green zone and a safe zone. And so that means that anybody who sees this on TV and says, oh, that'd be fun, they get on a plane and they come over there. And so you do get a mixed bag of individuals that you need to, well, I learned quickly, you're going to take a meeting with the guy, you're going to meet him for coffee, you're going to meet him in the town square, and then in about 6 seconds, you're going to know if this guy is going to be a part of your team or not, because you can smell it on him, kind of thing, right?
Okay.
And so it was a random sample of society, global society, and you really had to figure out, all right, who is going to be worth operating with, and who's going to be somebody who drags me down.
So, tell us a little bit about your selection process, how you're figuring that out, and how you're kind of going about understanding what they're really in there for. And, can they be a member of your team? I mean, I'm in the recruiting business. The people I work with are constantly looking for members of their team. And, how about some tips along, how you can sniff that out in under 10 seconds?
Well, I mean, first of all, I had to come to the realization, maybe the first week or second week I was in Ukraine in April, that I was building a team, right? Because I walked across the border thinking that I might get accepted for the Foreign Legion because I applied to fight in the Ukrainian military if needed. But I'm an Air Force guy. I didn't have combat experience. So I, left the possibility open for the fact that I wouldn't get selected for the Army. So that means I'd just be a humanitarian volunteer. So it took me a few weeks to realize, what might be fruitful is to recruit team members to spread all this work out. It's the second largest refugee crisis since World War II. There's 16 million people not living at home. That's a third of the Ukrainian population. And so, I mean, one human being, can't do it all. All of a sudden you realize very quickly, if we're going to move these supplies to the right places in the right time, I'm going to need other bodies, other hands, other volunteers. And so really, I didn't realize that when I went over to Ukraine to be a humanitarian volunteer, that I would use my business networking skills, right? That was really the most important thing that maybe I brought to the table, which was an ability to sit down for a coffee with a guy in Lviv or Kyiv or Dnipro or all over the country and just feel them out. And it was almost like it was an informal interviewing process, because you first had to ask, what are you doing here? And for what reason, right? Like, what, more succinctly or more accurately, like, what is the thing that you want to accomplish, and how do you want to help here in Ukraine? Because some people came because they wanted to help the elderly people. Some people came because they wanted to support the military. Some people were there because they wanted to help the pets, right? And the stray dogs. Like, so literally everything under the sun you could have made as your mission profile. And so first you had to figure out if you're on the same wavelength. Are we even trying to work on the same thing together, right? But even if you weren't, what I realized in this, maybe it's a lesson for the rest of life as well, is that our effectiveness really, once we'd been there for a couple months, our effectiveness really was found in the strength of our network, right? Because if you think about it, Ukraine is a place I've never been. I don't speak the language. It's a war zone, and so there's chaos. And so what the good operators over there ended up doing was building a base of knowledge, right? Building a kind of a path through the woods. You're in the dark and you don't know what's beyond Lviv. You don't know what's beyond Kyiv. You don't know how close to the enemy lines you can get. And so we realized, even the people that have been in the country only 10 days longer than you have, they know so much. They know how to get around. They know where the volunteers are. They know who needs help. And so every single day you were starting from scratch, learning about a country, its culture, the boots on the ground conditions, who you can trust, who you should be wary of, where the help is needed. And so in a very short amount of time, we realized, if we just network with more Western volunteers, then we will be more effective in solving tomorrow's problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if you don't know anything about Ukraine and then you've only been there for 10 days, certainly you got to ask some people if they know a shortcut, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it was the local Ukrainians that we would ask logically, and then they would become a part of our team and start building our knowledge base. And I liken it to this: if there was a war in America and foreigners came to America to try to solve problems and help Americans, well, of course you would ask the local American how to get things done and move the levers of progress to achieve your objective. And so really leaning on the local Ukrainians was a key part of our success, I think.
That's incredible. I mean, it's just, I mean, in so many ways, this sounds much more difficult than most, but it's like anything. You're completely blind. You're feeling your way around. You've got to have a real positive attitude and positive leader like you, right? That's like, hey, we're going to be in quicksand for a little bit and just, pushing through it and pull every resource we can and meet with everyone we can and, solve problems, figure out solutions.
And one of the mindsets that I had early on that I tried to, lead by example or repeat to the team members that we would recruit. And by the way, we ended up recruiting about 25 close partners from 8 different countries that just ended up being, part of our network. And we weren't all in the same place at the same time. We were all spread out all over the country, helping however we could. But certainly that was our core group that we called the A team, and, helped each other out to support humanitarian efforts. But the mindset that I tried to pass on to that team was, hey folks, we are not going to know how to help until we get there, right? Because it's easy to come in as a Westerner from the richest country on planet Earth, as a U.S. military veteran, to walk into Ukraine and say, this is what you got to do.
Right.
Well, let's take that advice for everybody listening. I mean, that's probably not a good strategy when you're coming in to a new situation. It really requires humility, right? It requires the ability to say, you know what, I have ideas about how I want to help, but I have to first ask some dumb questions and see if I'm even on the right track. Because what we saw was hundreds and thousands of tons of humanitarian aid was brought into Ukraine in March, April, and May. And it was stuff that nobody asked for, right? Okay. And it was N95 masks and nitrile gloves, and just stuff that some of the world just offloaded their junk on Ukraine. And so we realized very quickly, we're spending everybody's time in an environment where there's not a lot of time, right? Yeah. Because you're trying to save lives. We're spending a lot of time, energy, and effort getting boxes of things to the places that end up there, and the Ukrainian opens it up and says, we can't use this, right? And so it just took some humility and just a willingness to look dumb and a willingness to be the last person in the room who knows the right answer. And I think that served us well.
That's, it's the story is incredible. I mean, it's amazing what you're accomplishing over there. And I'm curious, I remember exactly where I was, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's all over the news. And I'm like, this is a huge deal. Like, this is unbelievable. And, you got all the publicity and got a lot of attention. And, here we are, 9 months later, pretty much, that this has been going on, and the media doesn't cover it as much. People lose their luster a little bit on it, and how are you keeping these folks going and doing a trip and then circling back and staying engaged and doing another trip and continuing to contribute?
I think two things to say about that. The people that did come over to Ukraine and Poland and end up meeting local Ukrainians and people in desperate need, largely once they saw the need, met the people, saw the women and children fleeing with nothing, if you're not motivated by that, you probably should just go home, right?
Right.
But let's also understand that, war makes people weary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter how motivated you are and how dedicated you are to the cause, the rhythm of war is exhausting, right? Mm-hmm. You don't get any sleep. You're constantly on edge. You're trying to solve problems in another language in a place you've never been before. And it has the urgency of needing to get the job done well, because on the other side of that effort is saving somebody's life, right? And so I would, as a leader, try to do my best in our group chats or whenever we would get together for a meal, celebrate those victories that we had that may not have seemed like the victory we're looking for. The victory we're looking for every day was to deliver boxes of aid and vans full of aid to people in desperate need. But some days you didn't get to do that. In an average week, maybe you got to make 4 deliveries, right? Because the other 3 days you were traveling across the country the size of Texas going to get the stuff.
Okay.
And so as often as possible, I would take the cash in my pocket on a day that we didn't have anything to really deliver. And I would just go to the local store with a bunch of volunteers, and we'd go buy energy drinks, and we'd go buy, cigarettes for the guys, and just something that would build their morale, right? And be able to give that small gift that maybe only cost $80,
mm-hmm.
but to show up to a unit that, needs to stay up for 20 hours in a row so they could use some energy drinks, right? And these guys out there, they don't have a lot of food, so they end up smoking and, to keep themselves awake, right? And so it's like, of course, we don't advocate for smoking, but it was just, if you're craving nicotine and you're on the front lines 2 hours away from a grocery store, that's some morale in your pocket, right?
100%.
And so we would just do stuff like that to keep people, give them a little warm fuzzy, because even those that were so dedicated to be as close as a kilometer away from the Russian enemy lines need some motivation when the work is long and hard. So just little stuff like that, and always including the team in the successes. I would go deliver something where the other half of the team wasn't present, so I'd make sure that we shared the photos and I mentioned them in my Facebook posts or something. It was all just those little things to keep the morale high.
It's so interesting. I mean, it all, on a very less important scale ties back to business, right? You're going in with a positive attitude. You're willing to ask dumb questions and take chances. You're willing to fumble around and figure out a strategy. You're networking with people and feeling them out and figuring out, are they with my team or not? You're going and celebrating every win, no matter how small. Hey, we're going to celebrate it. The van moved 1 inch closer to the border today, and it's cigarettes and energy drink time.
Right.
Is great. And another thing that I really like about you and what you do is you find all these creative ways. And I'm going to ask you here, tell us about Fargo. Tell us about camping and fundraising out there, because that is just I know you're really big on social media and you're live streaming that, but what a different way to get really creative in order to keep people aware of what's going on. So if you could share that with the listeners, I think you're a crazy man, but you tell the story.
I tell you, I came home from Ukraine. I'm an Airforce veteran that came back from the Donbass, right? And so I was doing some public events in my hometown of Fargo. Fargo's about 200,000 people, and did an event at the largest church in town and the largest university in town. And unfortunately, in the distracted world that we live in, I got 9 people at the first engagement and 8 people at the second. And that was poor showing, I thought. I figured that more people would maybe want to hear about these crazy adventures.
Sure.
And so at my wit's end and wondering what I needed to do in order to get people's focus back on what I think is the most important thing on planet Earth right now, which is this war in Ukraine, is, I just figured, Mark, what you're doing this year, dedicating your life to this, it deserves your best effort, and so what is that? What could I possibly do to get the attention of at least my local region or state, if not the whole country? And I decided it was publicity stunt time. And since my guys out in the Donbass in the trenches are sitting there wet and cold and requesting winter weather gear to keep them warm, I figured, well, I know a place that's cold. I know a place that we can prove a point.
Yeah.
It's Fargo, North Dakota. And so my guys are out there, with just what they have that they brought from home in many cases. And so I figured, well, if I did the same thing, I got my tent, sleeping bag, and some extra blankets and coats, and I decided to sleep outside during Operation Sleepout, December 16th, 2022 to New Year's Day of 2023. It was a 16-night stretch, and it was 40 below zero, and wind chill, and 25 below real temperature. And the whole point was, hey, I get to choose when to end this challenge because I'm in America. And if I'm cold, I can walk down the street to somebody's house and warm up.
Yeah, go to Starbucks.
My friends in Ukraine don't get to choose, right? And furthermore, I had to show the American public military life, because 93% of the American population does not know what military life is, because there's only 18 million veterans in the country. And so I had to show people what military life was, which means you have to endure and survive through whatever Mother Nature gives you, right? And so even though it was 40 below, I couldn't pull the plug, because that's not how military life is. You just got to suck it up and figure it out. And so my point in the news media was, hey, I just slept in 40 below weather and I'm still alive today. You can survive this stuff if you have the right gear that all my buddies out there need, including women and children, refugees, and people living throughout the country without power. All the things they need are sitting on shelves in the United States of America. And so go get some thermal socks and donate them to me, and I'll bring them over to the Donbass in a couple weeks.
Incredible. And it leads me to my next question. How do you stay motivated? How do you keep doing this? Maybe 2 or 3 things you do every single day, because 99.9% of people in your shoes would say, I'm done with this. I'm packing up the tent and I'm going to that Starbucks. I mean, I don't think I'd last out there long at all, to be honest. So, what are you doing? How do you do this?
I think it's maybe one general idea and then a couple specific things that I try to do often. One general idea is that, the level of dedication that I'm attempting to give to this mission and these people is the same level of dedication that I brought to the United States military, right? And although I didn't sign papers that are legally binding and subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, although Uncle Sam is not telling me to do this and ordering me to, I'm trying to give that level of commitment as I would if I were a part of the American military, which means I got battle buddies out there who don't have anybody to watch their six. And if I don't, there is nobody else. There are people that I'm serving in Ukraine and supporting with supplies that if I don't bring it from America, it's not coming, right? And so you remind yourself of that. You remind yourself what it is to be a military member. And every military member, we can flip it on like a switch because it's in us. We were trained, right? And so now that I'm in this mode of supporting a fellow freedom fighter, I really never have to wonder if I'm going to quit, because that's not what the American military does, So that in general, I remind myself of the commitment I made to myself to do this like I would have in the military. But specifically, almost daily, I am looking through the photos of I took like 8,000 photos in Ukraine. I'm looking through the photos of the people that I met, that I now haven't seen for a few months that are still out there. And I know they're in a frozen apartment because it's 20 degrees out and they don't have any power. I look at the pictures of the friends and I just try to remember them, right? Because today, I don't know, something happened earlier today and it didn't go right. And I was like, I was frustrated. And I was just like a little bit down. But then immediately you just start thinking about the people that you're serving and the hardships that they're going through. And so whatever I'm going through is nothing compared to that. And, that maybe will help you cross off the next task on your list and do it with a cheerful heart. Because as was said by one of our presidents, you could triple Americans' troubles and we'd still be better off than everybody else on earth. And the final thing I think I do to keep myself going is just a vision for what I think this could be in the next iteration, right? Operation Sleepout is over. I'll be traveling back to Ukraine in a week and a half and trying to figure out, all right, what is that vision for how we're going to help in this phase of the operation? And, it's recruiting veterans, it's activating volunteers on a local basis, getting on national media, etc. But you need to have that vision that you're aiming for. Otherwise, the chaos of war will just grind you to a halt and you'll be in the fetal position, right? Yeah. You have to know what your mission profile states and what you're working toward. Otherwise, you'll just spin your wheels.
So inspirational. It's incredible what you're doing. I fully support you guys. My mind is blown by what you're accomplishing and what you're doing to help people. It's just, it's just unmatched. So I can't thank you enough for joining today. Again, I'm Dan Steinler with CCR Search. Mark J. Lindquist, find him on Facebook, find him on LinkedIn, find him on social media, dedicate some funds to his cause, get some clothes to him. People are in desperate need across the seas. And Mark, thank you so very much for joining today. It's been unbelievable pleasure having you.
Thank you, my friend.
Talk to you soon.